Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 2 for this news report for today, for Monday, August 12th, 2013. My website was ggnonline.net. It kind of still is, I can access it, but viewers are leaving comments that they are getting, that it's been hacked and they're getting sent to some forklifting company and all kinds of different crazy stuff. So I don't know what's going on with it. I don't really have any answers, and I don't really have any solutions or really alternatives, so it is what it is. My YouTube channels are DDarko 2012 and DDarko 2013. We just covered this about Britain basically going near North Africa, and of course they're saying it has to do with something to do with Spain, but we were just talking about Morocco, and that immigrants are crossing, and now you got ships going there. Some tension going on between Algeria and Tunisia. Tunisia government's kind of unstable right now. Of course, in Egypt and Libya it is. Mali, they're just having the elections. I just saw a quote by the Tuareg rebels basically saying that elections aren't going to do crap as far as bringing stabilization or stability. Also, this article here, basically these Gulf dictatorships are asking the British government to send the RAF and the Army, and I guess the ships as well, their Navy, to go back into the Suez to guarantee cheap prices, and basically it's against Iran. Royal Navy deployed laser weapons during the Falklands War, August 9th, 2013. Despite recent demonstrations by the U.S. Navy, we think of laser weapons as being things of the future. However, previously classified British documents prove that not only were there major powers working on laser weapons in the 70s and 80s, but they were already being deployed with combat units in war zones. This is part of a Ministry of Defense letter that was released under a 30-year rule that reveals laser weapons were deployed on Royal Navy ships during the Falklands War in 1982. Navy should shift warships to West Coast in response to China's aggressive military buildup, defense analyst says. This all has to do with trade. That's basically what it has to do with, markets and trade routes and cheap labor. Canada, a little bit of a typo here. Canada should get out of its Cold War mindset and move the majority of its warships from Halifax to British Columbia's coast in response to the Chinese Navy's aggressive military buildup, says defense analyst. U.S. government has already announced its plan to put 60% of its naval assets on the West Coast by 2020 as part of a plan to make the 21st century America's Pacific century, a term coined by former U.S. Secretary Hillary Clinton. They say China is expanding its own naval fleet and showing greater assertiveness in its maritime disputes with its neighbors, talking about Japan. A friendly visit, remember this, from August 3rd, Russian warships dock in Cuba for a friendly visit. Then the Department of Defense weighs major COCOM realignment, possible U.S. command realignments. The map shows how the Pentagon might consolidate and reorganize its geographical combatant commands in wake of budget cuts. I don't think it has anything to do with budget cuts. This is all part of the plan. Northcom and Southcom could become a single COCOM. It's all about merging the unions, man. I mean, it's so funny how much crap they can just continue with as far as the agenda goes under the guise of tighter budgets. Says then he had here the EUCOM or EUCOM could oversee much of Africa as it is, or as it did prior to the stand-up of AFRICOM. Then you have CENTCOM could oversee the Horn of Africa as it did before the AFRICOM stand-up. And then you have, that's of course, like you have over here Yemen and Somalia, and that PACOM could be expanded to include Pakistan and Afghanistan. So the Pentagon is considering a major overhaul of its combatant commands, realigning oversight within hot-button areas of the world and eliminating thousands of military and civilian positions, according to defense sources. That's pretty interesting. They were going to dissolve AFRICOM, expand Pacific Command to include Afghanistan and Pakistan, which are part of Central Command. Like I said before, talking about Chuck Hagel, consolidations for significant budget-cutting options. I just believe that there's most of the planet is run by a few corporations, and there's not really any sovereigns left. So when you don't have any sovereigns left, all you have to do is just be able to control and maintain and manage. It's more about managing the entire world's population and its resources by a few entities, and so there are no real sovereigns to stand up against this global monopoly or duopoly. basically power structure, financial power structure, which is why they switched to, like they say, a more leaner army and Marines and that, and Navy, using more of technology, using more drones, robotics, special forces, and you see it all. Just look around at the checkout aisle. You'll see them in the magazines about every couple of weeks. You'll see magazines in the little rack there from Popular Mechanics and Time or Life. Some propaganda about special forces or drones and how it's a way of life, and you're just going to have to live with it, because we all have a big debate about it, right? It's a big debate that goes on about what's going to happen. Now, that they're just there to engineer your consent and tell you this is the way it's going to be. This stuff is probably planned, I'd imagine, 100 years in advance, 50 years, 20 years in advance. I'd imagine that things that happened 20 to 50 years ago are for sure going to happen, and they plan 50 years in advance of it. I found this kind of interesting, 5 new countries that might exist by 2025. We've already talked about Yemen. They want to basically secede or something, the southern Yemen. I think that's what part of the whole Al-Qaeda thing is about, when they strike militants. Also, we talked about Syria being balkanized into 3 states, Kurdish, basically autonomous Kurdistan. Then to the north, near Aleppo, you'd have kind of this Sunni Salafite. Then in the south, you'd still have the kind of the old remnants of the Syrian Alawite Shiite country. And there's other places too. Pakistan might be broken down into smaller states. Iraq could, and Libya could. Then you have here Scotland. It says, as far as independent movements go, Scotland hasn't made. The Scottish National Party, the country's largest political party, already has cleared out its calendar for a September 18th, 2014 referendum. This is what makes the Scottish case unique, is that the state that they're separating, the UK, is actually okay with the whole idea, and they're signing off on it. And it says here, the biggest question is the Scottish economy, or could it be self-sustaining? How will independent Scotland relate to the UK and the EU? What about military and foreign issues? Those are really scary tactics, real scary tactics. They should be able to handle themselves by themselves. And it's like I mentioned before about the whole potato famine in Ireland. What about cows? What about dairy? What about all the other stuff that they had to survive? This whole thing about, all this Irish labor that went over to the United States had to happen because of the potato famine, right? The potato blight. And you think about, well, they could have stayed there. I mean, it was pretty bad. That was one of the biggest crops, I guess, but they still had food. They still had the way to survive. But then they all got lured over there to the United States, like other places, like Germany, and then slaves from Africa to what? For cheap labor. The Chinese. Catalonia, that's in Spain. We've talked about that, about the Spanish Civil War. So talking about Spain's economy being bad. It says, home to one of Europe's biggest metropolitan areas, Barcelona, Catalonia has seen hundreds of thousands of citizens turn out for protests in favor of independence despite the Spanish constitution's ban on secession. They say an independent Catalonia could be sustainable, too. The region, about the size of Belgium, accounts for a quarter of Spain's total exports. So it says here that Spain takes more than it gives, spending only 57 cents in the region for every dollar of taxes that it collects. And 60% of the citizens support the secession, but hardline opposition to independence in the rest of the country may hamper what would seem like to be a done deal. Then you got this Republika Srpska. I don't even know what the heck that is, but I guess it's the Serb Republic, one of the 2 political entities that make up Bosnia, and this Herzegovina has made no secret of his contempt for the rest of the state. And then 4 is Quebec. Quebec will be watching the results of the Scottish and Catalan referendums particularly closely next year. If successful, to provide a framework for how the majority French-speaking Canadian province goes forward with its long and torturous efforts to become a sovereign state. And 5, Somaliland, tucked in between Ethiopia and southern coast of the Gulf of Aden, takes expected secessionist paradigm and flips it on its head. Said it's a relatively stable, moderate democracy looking for independence from a country synonymous with failed governance, Somalia. It says here that Somaliland is an unrecognized, self-declared de facto sovereign state that is internationally recognized as an autonomous region of Somalia. And if I remember correctly, too, and I did videos on this, says the government of Somaliland regards itself as the successor state to the British Somaliland Protectorate. And I talked about this before, about the history of Somalia and how they had basically broken it up. You had the Germans and the British trying to defeat all this, the Somalis, and take their trade routes. And the reason, one of the biggest reasons, they blame it on this 1988, this dictatorship, committing massacres. But they don't talk about the British and the Germans' own massacres against the Somali people for their trade routes. They like to just overlook that history. But in the north here, they have resources, and that's how they did it. They divided it up, and the people in the south, where you see all the violence and basically bloodshed and nothing ever changes, is where they don't really have all that many resources compared to the north, which is where the British kind of took over for a period of time there. Kind of like other places, whether it's Germany and that. I know that had to do with Russia and basically the Allies dividing that up, but Korea, North and South Korea after World War II. If you can't defeat a country, if you can't defeat a people, you just divide them, split them up. Speaking of Korea, South Korea, U.S. to conduct joint military drill. It says here on Saturday they announced that they would launch an annual military drill called Ulchi Freedom Guardian from August 19th to the 30th. So, it'll include about 30,000 U.S. troops, including most of them based in the South, plus 3,000 from overseas taking part in the drill. More than 50,000 South Korean troops will also take part. It is largely computer-simulated exercise, with their troops remaining in normal bases. Then in the Philippines, they're negotiating a larger U.S. presence amid SEBRO, a proposed increase in the U.S. military presence in the Philippines, including the pre-positioning of equipment, will help the country defend its territorial waters amid a conflict with China in the South China Sea. Talks will start on Wednesday in an agreement that will allow more American troops to rotate to the Philippine military bases. So, it says hundreds of American troops have already been stationed in the southern Philippines for counterterrorism training since 2002. Also, we have India and Pakistan and China. Can India blockade China? So, the Indian Navy has had a big week. This says a reactor in its first indigenous nuclear submarine went critical on Saturday, and its first indigenous aircraft carrier was formally unveiled today. So it's been assumed that one of the primary tasks of rapidly modernizing service and its expanding fleet is to apply pressure to China's sea lanes of communication. Following that, we have India aircraft carrier nation joins elite naval group. They built their own aircraft carrier. Only the U.S., Russia, France, and Britain can make the same claim. And this was launched on Monday, today, August 12th. Pakistan accuses India of killing civilians in Kashmir. They accused India on Monday of killing a civilian with unprovoked firing in Kashmir in the latest series of recent clashes with the disputed Himalayan regions. Tensions have flared again in the heavily militarized Kashmir Valley, with the nuclear-armed neighbors accusing each other of cross-border firing. Indian troops resorted to unprovoked firing in the wee hours on Monday. Pakistani troops effectively responded to Indian firing, he said, adding that one civilian was killed due to unprovoked Indian shelling. So, Indian troops resorted to this unprovoked firing in 3 areas along a de facto border known as the Line of Control. So that's it for this video. Please join me in part 3. I should have about 4 parts today. This is GGN and I'm Darko. Thank you.